Bringing a fresh new perspective on the challenges and issues that face our criminal justice system and their impact on all New Yorkers. This is In Your Court with your host, President of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association, Patrick Cullen.
Good morning. Welcome to In Your Court. I am your host, Patrick Cullen, and I'm the President of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association, proudly representing law enforcement professionals throughout New York City and the lower Hudson Valley. For those of you not familiar with our program, we are one of the largest labor unions representing law enforcement in New York State, and our mission is to protect our members' rights, provide benefits for them and their families, and preserve the ages-old sacred agreement of bargaining between employees and their employers, the latter of which is something we are truly being put to the test on in recent weeks, and of course a subject we will be able to discuss with today's guests. But first, I want to pay tribute to an active SCOA member we lost this week. Court Officer Joe Spiver tragically passed away on October the 7th. The loss of an active officer is always a blow to the union, but even more so to the officers who shared the assignment with Joe. In this case, my brothers and sisters in Bronx County Supreme Court. I personally worked with Joe from the outset of his career, and I can tell you that he was one of a kind. His demeanor and his presence at work will surely be missed, and our deepest sympathies go out to his family, friends, and coworkers. Again, we ask for your prayers for Joe and his family. Rest in peace, Officer Joe Spiver. I'm blessed today to have two terrific guests. Our first guest is someone whose labor connections run deep and someone I admire greatly. She has taken her labor experience and turned it into a proud and successful turn as a state senator representing the 23rd District, covering parts of Staten Island and Brooklyn. I'm so happy to welcome Senator Diane Savino in your court. Welcome, Senator.
Happy to be here, Pat. Good to see you. Good to see you in person.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yes.
It's terrific. Maybe we're getting back to some kind of comfort level where we can start to do that, but it's great to see you as always. You're no stranger to those of us representing public employees, but for those in our audience who may not be aware, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, it's first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm always happy to talk to working men and women, and it's hard for me to realize that I started my career in city service 31 years ago last month. Wow. I can still remember the day, September of 1990. I went to work for the city of New York as a caseworker in the city's child welfare system. I learned early on about this annual issue called a budget dance where, budget cuts were always coming and, workers were always being targeted. And as a result of that, I got involved in my union.
Right.
I became a delegate. My first election was a delegate. A delegate, an activist. Eventually, I became an executive board member. And after a few years, I went to work for the Social Service Employees Union, Local 371.
Right.
We're a very large union, 18,000 people who work in the child welfare system, welfare, the shelters, you name it, we're across, the entire social service delivery system. And after a few years of working for the union, I represented people in disciplinary cases and grievances and arbitrations. And then I took over the union's political program.
Right.
And after a few years of doing that, helping elect people who we believed were labor friendly and then holding their feet to the fire when they weren't, I was recruited to run for Senate. In 2004, I ran for the state Senate.
Right. And you mentioned large union, a well-respected union, but also a very strong union.
Yes.
And I think that those things may not all be congruous at the same time. A large union doesn't mean that you're a strong union, but where you come from is absolutely a huge influence on the political civic life in New York, and you've been a huge part of that. What, other than that, what spurred you to run for office? Other than your involvement, was there something other than your political involvement? Was it something you saw, like where you were from, your upbringing, anything like that, that said, maybe I can make the difference?
You want to know the truth? It never occurred to me to run for office until the day that I was approached and asked if I would run for it. It was a vacancy in the Senate district that I was living in, and my initial reaction was, I can't do that. First of all, it's hard for women to run for office, and, what do you mean, me? I'm just a, even though I was the vice president of a union, in my mind, I'm a civil servant. I'm like a regular person. And quite honestly, those are the kind of people we need in office. We need more people, especially those who come out of the ranks of labor, to run for office because we don't have enough of those voices in the legislature. But one of the things that drove me at the time was I had a simple conversation with myself and the president of my union at the time, Charles Ensley. He was an amazing man. And he said to me, where do you think you can be more effective for working people?
Wow.
And I thought about it, and I realized that I had a good gig in the union. I could have stayed there forever. But could I do more for working men and women, not just my own members, but for others if I were in elected office? And that was what made the decision easy for me.
That's terrific. And I think that, anytime anybody puts a name in a hat for anything, whether it's a state Senate seat, like you said, a delegate election, school board, whatever it might be, you have to have that conversation with yourself. And I think, my follow-up question was, what keeps you running? But I think you answered that. You continue to have that conversation. Am I being effective?
Right.
Can I still, be effective for my constituents, add to my community's, benefits that we're bringing home from Albany to my community and things like that? And there's certainly your track record proves that you are. What committees do you chair?
Well, right now I chair a new one. It's called the Internet and Technology Committee because the world of work is changing, Pat.
Right.
I mean, when you think about back when I first started working for the city, nobody had cell phones, nobody had computers.
Right.
You clocked in the morning, you went to lunch, you came back after lunch, nobody knew where you were, and you went home at night. Think how different the world is
Absolutely.
now.
Absolutely.
The world of work is changed in so many ways. Technology has improved it, but it's also extended the workday for so many of us that we don't even think about.
Right.
Could you imagine 30 years ago, your supervisor calling you up at home at night or emailing you or texting you,
right.
Just reaching out?
Right.
It's unheard of.
Right.
Now we're supposed to be on call 24 hours a day. People don't think we're supposed to be compensated for that. But then you look at how technology has changed, the restaurant industry and deliveries and ride sharing, and it just goes on and on. So it's a double-edged sword. And quite honestly, government has not done a very good job of managing it. On top of that, if you look at our city and state agencies, the court system, the systems that we have in place don't really serve the public well. So I'm kind of looking at things like procurement rules. Are we getting the best bang for our buck? Are we secure and safe?
Right.
Cybersecurity is a tremendous risk.
Absolutely.
It's a national security issue, and none of us are really handling it well. So, and for unions, it's a huge issue. So there's a lot of exciting areas around internet and technology, and the law is 50 years behind the times.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a testament to where you come from, that you should be kind of leading that charge with your experience in labor, and you previously chaired the labor committee.
I've chaired the labor committee, the banking committee, civil service and pensions, children and families. I've lost track over the years, and of course I sit on the Finance Committee and the Rules Committee, which are the two most important committees in the Senate.
Absolutely. But do you think it has just a sidetrack on the tech, the growing kind of the gig economy and what you're focusing on now? Do you think it has a negative effect on people that we are kind of intended or expected to be available 24/7, or you're checking your emails after you eat dinner with your family, and you used to be able to, lock the door of the business and go home and come back the next day, and that's not happening so much anymore.
Well, it definitely does. So there's a couple of things that's happening. One, there's growth of what we call the gig economy, which is really independent contractors who have no protections.
Right.
The foundational protections that we all take for granted: unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, the right to organize.
Right.
These workers don't have those things. They think they're in a better position because they have flexibility, but they really don't have flexibility because if they're not working off these apps, they're not earning, and quite honestly, they're easy to take advantage of. And for those of us who aren't in that position, but we feel that we now have to respond to our employers when we're really not being the hours that we're being compensated for. So how does a union negotiate that? How do you negotiate for your members beyond the hours that they're being asked to perform tasks when they're really not supposed to be? So as I say, the world of work has changed, and we have to figure out how do we harness technology, not hinder it, but also protect the rights of workers.
Yeah, and do you think that folks that are experiencing work that way, or engaging with their work life through these new ways, do you think that that they have, obviously they don't have the protections, but do you think that what they may think is a gain in flexibility is a sacrifice in longevity?
Absolutely.
Right. And so I don't have to work today because I decide I don't have to work today, but then 2 or 3 days later there is no work for you, and that gets lost. And I think we see people who are, I don't know if this is a proper terminology, but job hopping, right? If you're an Uber driver one day, you're a Dash door the next day, and some of that stuff just dries up. Maybe not New York City as much, but outlying areas.
True. And there's also there's a corresponding cost to the taxpayer. We saw last year when the world literally stopped.
Yes.
We shut down businesses, we shut down industries because of the concern of the spread of the coronavirus. If you were an employee and you worked for an employer who paid into the unemployment system, you had a wage replacement mechanism. That's what unemployment is.
Right.
It's a wage replacement mechanism. So if there's a disruption in the economy, you're protected. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people did not have that in place because they were not working for a traditional employer.
Right.
And so what did we do? We created this pandemic unemployment emergency fund from the federal government to pay this out. We can continue to do that.
Right.
Then there was those workers who weren't eligible for anything. Many of them are undocumented, and the state felt it was necessary to create an excluded workers fund for them.
Right.
That fund has quickly run out of money.
Right.
So government has an interest in trying to solve this problem. Again, we don't want to hinder the technology. People like flexibility in their life,
Sure.
But we have to figure out a solution to this problem because in the long run, we cannot continue to subsidize employers who are not contributing to the unemployment system or not paying into workers' comp. You see these guys driving around on bicycles delivering, pizzas, et cetera. The number of workplace injuries is astronomical, and there's no protection for them. So who picks up the cost then?
Right.
The taxpayer through emergency Medicaid. So we have to solve this problem.
Yeah, it sounds like a big one, and I know that you're up to the task, and I know many of your colleagues are as well. But when kind of just piggybacking on that, and it comes to mind that this mentality out there that some people are not going back to work after the pandemic and such because they're comfortable getting paid through different funds and things like that. What do you make of that? Because I don't put a lot of credence in it because I believe New York is built by workers, people who take pride in going to work every day.
I don't. I've heard that we're encouraging people to stay home because unemployment. But New York State, the unemployment ran out. So at the end of September, it ended.
Right.
There was no pandemic unemployment assistance anymore. There's no federal emergency program anymore. So what I do think, though, is that there were a lot of people working in jobs that were dead-end jobs that didn't provide a decent wage or any level of benefits because they were working largely in non-unionized occupations. And after a year of not doing that anymore, they may have rethought what they want to do with their life.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. We're also seeing, that this refusal to return is driving up wages, which is also a good thing. You're not supposed to take advantage of your workforce, and at the same time, it kind of reinforces the idea that working people need a voice, and they need a collective voice, and there's no greater collective voice than belonging to a union.
I thought that one of the things that may have been missed on a lot, believe me, I'm not in no position to criticize the extent that the government came to a lot of people's rescue during the COVID crisis. It's still ongoing. But I thought one place where they could have maybe added some focus would have been, I'm saying this because of your answer there, could we have started to fund education programs for workers? Start sending people, back to college who maybe left college early to provide for a family, sick family members, what have you. What could you foresee a mechanism down the road where we say, maybe we really got to start taking folks and educating them? A lot of people don't have the ability to go to college after high school, and it's not based on their aptitude. It's based on their wallet, and that's just not fair.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt about that. And part of that retraining or retrenchment in workers was also kind of held up by the fact that most of our CUNY campuses were closed as well.
Yeah.
We created a process in CUNY where almost nobody pays tuition there. If you're eligible for tuition assistance, it covers most of the cost of your tuition. A TAP award covers 90% of it.
Right.
It's the ancillary costs. It's books. It's additional fees, et cetera, which we can do better with. We created the Excelsior Scholarship Fund, which is what they call the last mile. So for people who need a little bit more to cover their full, tuition, but then they have to give something back. They have to agree to stay in the state for X number of period of time. But there's way more we could do. We have hundreds of millions of dollars that we get to spend on like workforce development and job retraining. The question is, are we using it in the best way? Are we training workers for the jobs of the future? And I think that's a different question, Pat.
Yeah.
Instead of just training people for menial jobs, what are the jobs of the future? Many of them are technology.
Yep.
And we're not adequately preparing people for that. And, it should start in our elementary schools and our high schools with STEM, what they call STEM, which is science, technology, and math, engineering and math.
Right.
And we need to invest more in that and make sure that kids realize that when they graduate from high school, not everybody does need to go to college.
Right.
There's careers in the trades, there's careers in civil service, but there are really lucrative careers in technology that don't require you to go to college, but there are training courses that you need to take.
Right.
College in and of itself is a wonderful thing, right? It helps broaden your horizons and teaches you to think about the world in a different way, but you don't have to go when you're 18.
Right.
You have an entire lifetime to decide when you want to go to college, if you want to go to college.
Yeah, that's, I guess, the kind of the pattern that we've fallen into. This is what you're supposed to do, follow the... It's,
And we encourage people to take on tremendous amounts of debt, which is crazy.
Incredible. It's incredible. I think that, I'm going to shift away from kind of the new work environment of the world.
And the old one?
Let's go back to the old one. But what in your career in Albany are some legislative pieces that you sponsor to help get passed that, relate to labor, but in general, that you're really, most proud of?
So over the years, there's about 140 bills hanging on my wall. Some of them are, that only matter to one union. There could be an issue that only matters to the court officers.
Right.
There are bills that matter only to caseworkers. But I would say there's a couple of bills that I think I'm particularly proud of because the first one made history. As you know, in 1935, when the National Labor Relations Act was passed, which granted workers the right to organize, it left out two groups of workers. One was farm workers, the other was domestic workers. The whole history as to why that happened, but no state had ever found a way to grant basic workers' rights to domestic workers, which are nannies and maids and
right.
People who work in other people's homes, until we did it here in New York. I wrote the law with former Assemblyman Keith Wright. We were the first in the country to do it. So that was, particularly meaningful because FDR, FDR, who was a former member of the New York State Senate,
right.
people don't realize that,
Yep.
has always been somewhat of a hero of mine, but he, as a compromise, left domestic workers out of labor protections. And so we were able to close that, and then that led the way for other states to start. So that was one. I wrote the first, probably the strongest wage theft protection law in the country. It is, again, if you're not in a union, it is very easy for you to be ripped off in your workplace.
Right.
Employers take advantage of their workers all the time. If you're not paying your employees what they're entitled to, you're not also paying payroll taxes. These are bad employers.
Yeah,
it
sure.
happens to workers everywhere. So in 2010, I was the sponsor, along with who is now the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hastie.
Mm-hmm.
We wrote the New York State Wage Theft Protection Act, which is considered the strongest wage theft law in the country. So that was a huge game changer for a lot of low-wage workers. And then shifting gears, I would say I was the architect of the state's medical cannabis law,
Right.
which created medical marijuana law, which is now, finally improving, and that was a real fight to get that done.
Sure.
But
it's always a fight.
I'm really proud of that.
It's always a fight,
Yeah.
though, right? I mean, you have many bills
Yeah.
you could talk about. We could do a few shows on your accomplishments, but it's always a fight. It's never easy. None of these jobs, anytime you put, like I said, your name in a hat, it's never easy when you actually come out and you go, oh, now I have to do the work. But and just to kind of again, to kind of pat you on the back, because I do admire you and your commitment to the people of this state, including our members. We have when we have the in-person joint legislative budget hearings, you are there throughout the day, sometimes 12, 14, 16 hours, and you're there and you're asking questions and gathering answers so that you can make, an informed decision on behalf of your constituents. And I just think it's one of the most admirable things I've seen in state government as a labor leader. And, I want to thank you in person for that, and I think our members should do as well, as should your constituents, but it shouldn't go unnoticed.
Thank you. I mean, the fact that we sit there and listen, it's like it's a minimum part of our job. But I get the frustration.
Yeah.
I can see how it's frustrating when you see members come in and they just get up and walk out because they only want to hear the commissioner or they only want to hear, when the mayor comes. Quite honestly, I think we do these hearings backwards. We should hear from the advocates and the union leaders before we hear from the commissioners, because then we know what questions to ask them.
Absolutely. I agree.
No one's listened to me on that one.
I'll back you up on that one. With your background in labor, which we've extensively talked about here, what are some implications of the Taylor Law as it relates to what we're seeing with vaccine mandates?
So, that's a very interesting question. So when the mayor, let's back this up. The requirement, or I guess the decision to impose vaccine mandates on employees is already settled law. It goes back to a Supreme Court decision.
Correct.
Back to the smallpox vaccine.
Right.
That being said, not all workers are the same under the law. They're just not. So if you are an employee who happens to have due process rights, which is where public employees in the state of New York come in, the Taylor Law is the governing law that addresses the issue of public sector collective bargaining. For those who weren't familiar with what the Taylor Law means, that means, as I told the mayor at the time and the governor's office at the time, and anyone else who will listen, this is a mandatory subject of collective bargaining.
Right.
It's very simple. This is Labor Law 101.
Yes. Wages,
hours, terms and conditions of employment must be negotiated with the people who hold the bargaining certificate for the affected members.
Right.
That's it. They don't have to agree with you.
I'm so glad to hear you say it, because that's what we've been driving home to our members over the last 8 weeks or so.
Right.
That's what we're fighting for. We're not taking a stance in court and things like that of this nature where we say we're pro-vaccine, we're anti-vaccine. We're pro-union, and we're pro-negotiation.
It's like any other change in circumstance, whether it's a new uniform, a body camera. I've tried to take the word vaccine out and put in any other change in circumstance.
Right.
That would be a new requirement for your workers, your members, to have to adhere to. It's a mandatory subject of bargaining. And if they would have approached it that way, because you are going to have some members who are going to voluntarily do it right off the bat, because they believe that it's the right thing to do.
Sure.
You're going to have some members who, as we found, have medical conditions. So what's the process by which they can apply for medical exemption where it's fairly evaluated?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Or there has to be some recognition of religious exemption that can be fairly evaluated, right? You can't just come up today and say, I have a religious, objection to it when you've never had one before.
Right.
Right. So it has to be fairly evaluated, so, and that all has to be negotiated. As we saw, I think the teachers had an arbitration decision which kind of laid out those things. And then what happens to those members who refuse to cooperate?
Disciplinary.
Right.
Right.
That's
mandatory subject of collective
That's
bargaining.
what you have to negotiate. Now, if you work in a setting where there is no union and there is no collective bargaining rights, you don't have those rights.
Right. I really appreciate your take on that, and it's great to hear coming from somebody of your stature to kind of help our members. This show is for our members and about our members, and to have someone who sits up in Albany, understands the civil service law in and out. It's great to hear you say that. I did want to point out something I read recently as you were at a opening of a mental health facility on Staten Island. We're running a little bit short on time, but I just think it's such an important issue that we're dealing with in New York, and just speak to it and as quickly as possible as how important that is and what it's going to add to for the citizens on Staten Island.
Well, the new South Beach Psychiatric Facility is not just for Staten Island, just happens to be in Staten Island.
Okay.
It is a beautiful facility, and it shows a huge difference in the way people who are in a mental health crisis are going to be in an environment where it's far more welcoming. If you look at some of the old facilities, they're incredibly frightening and intimidating, and it's no wonder that nobody wants to go into them.
Right.
This is a completely different environment. It took the input of the people who provide services, who treat the mentally ill, as well as new architects and engineers to create this beautiful place.
And your background in the social services, I'm sure, went a long way in getting that done. Thank you so much for joining me in your court, and you've always been there for us, and you can always count on us being there for you. We could probably do another hour, but
anytime.
as time has come up, Senator Diane Savino, thanks for being in your court. We'll be back after this.
We return now to In Your Court with the president of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association, Patrick Cullen.
Welcome back. The next guest in your court today is another esteemed member of the New York State Senate, representing the 22nd Senate District in Brooklyn. It's my pleasure to welcome Senator Andrew Gurnardis to the program. Senator, thank you for making some time to join me and discuss some of the issues we're facing these days.
My pleasure, Pat. Great to be back with you.
Great. For those who don't know, introduce yourself to our audience. What is it that you do, and what brought you to running for state Senate?
So I represent, as you said, the 22nd District, which are most of the communities of southern Brooklyn, from Bay Ridge all the way out to Marine Park. Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights, Bensonhurst, Bath Beach, Gravesend, Sheepshead Bay, Midwood, Marine Park, and Garrison Beach. I've been elected since 2018. Prior to that, I worked as the general counsel for the Brooklyn Borough President, who will, in all likelihood and hopefully, God willing, be our next mayor, Eric Adams.
Right.
What brought me to this work is, I just have a real deep, strong belief in public service and helping other people. That's how my parents raised me. That's how I grew up. And, I was always taught that if you have the ability to help make a difference in someone else's life, you do it because you can and you should. And I think just the natural evolution of that has really led me down a career into politics, not for the politics aspect of it, but really about helping other folks, whether it's solving a constituent problem, someone's light post is out or there's a pothole on their block, or trying to think about big, important questions like how do we help protect workers who are, facing salary cuts or wage cuts or rising healthcare costs or pension benefits or things like that. So that's why I'm doing this, and I've really enjoyed it since I got elected in 2018.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I think that really what you name all those neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and we have so many members who are your constituents, and that's why having someone like yourself on is really important to what we do and the mission of this program. This is a show, for our members and about our members, and so while we have elected officials on, you're representing a lot of our members, and I think that's what really the connection is, and why someone like yourself is such an important guest for us. On top of that, I think the common thread with so many of our guests, whether it's elected officials on the local or state level, or union officials, executive board members, everybody, I think, follows that same kind of path. Like, can I help my brothers and sisters, my community, my fellow neighbors, my fellow New Yorkers? And when the answer is yes, you do your best to try and do that, and you've done a tremendous job in your first few years up in the state Senate, and so really,
thank you. I appreciate that.
Happy to have you. What committee do you chair?
So I am the chairman of the Civil Service and Pensions Committee, which is a committee that is of great interest, I believe, to your members for sure.
Absolutely. Can you just speak to what are some of the activities that the civil service? I mean, it seems pretty eponymous, but what does civil service and pensions cover? What are your duties as the chair there, and what are the issues that you really kind of trying to face every legislative session in civil service and pensions?
Sure. So we, it's a pretty, you would think it's a pretty obvious committee jurisdiction, civil service and pensions. So we oversee and have jurisdiction and oversight over any issues that affect the retirement and security law, the pension benefits that our public workers receive, when they join the public sector workforce as public servants.
Yes.
The workplace protections that they have as civil service employees, when that comes to issues about bargaining, issues about discipline, issues that affect their overall ability to, pursue their occupation and their employment, in the public sector, in the public's employ. So that's really broadly speaking what we do. As a practical matter, I think a lot of the committee's work tends to focus more on the pension side, frankly,
right.
Because everyone, we haven't really made many significant changes to civil service law, in the last 100-plus years, a couple of changes here or there, but really it comes down to pensions and benefits, and to make sure that we are, A, paying people what they deserve, and B, also making sure that they have the retirement security that they deserve. And one of the things that I think most folks often overlook or don't think about, in terms of lay people, they always ask, well, what is it with pensions and this and that? Look, your members or any public sector worker, they take a contract, they take a promise. I'm going to work for the public. I'm going to accept a reduced salary in many cases because I know that the public can't pay me what I'm worth. But the return promise is that because of my years of service, whether it's 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, whatever, that there will be retirement security for me when I leave this job after I do my turn, serving the public. And I think that's a really important promise and a really important contract, a social contract that we have to always remind people about. Whenever there's all these conversations about, we need to cut back pension benefits, we need to scale back salary and wages and this and that. Well, no. I mean, this is about paying people what they're worth, which every worker, public or private, deserves, and to make sure that they're treated with dignity and respect when they leave the workplace and when they can, make sure they can help raise their family and retire securely afterwards. So that's really what the committee focuses on. As the chairman for the last 3 years, I've made that a priority, making sure that we can have a robust, safe, and secure public pension system, making sure that we protect the integrity of the defined benefit pension system, which is so important to so many of our public sector workers here in New York.
Yes.
We are fortunate in New York. A lot of other states, a lot of other people don't have that same benefit that we have. I think that's important. But also more broadly, as someone who is, my mom was a public school educator. My dad works at a public hospital. I grew up knowing the value of a career in public service, not just for the salary and benefits, but because of the good you can do for other people.
Right.
And one of the things I've really tried to think about as the chairman of this committee is how do we prepare the next generation of public sector workers? How do we incentivize kids who are in school today, in college or younger today, to think about a career, whether it's in the courts or it's in an agency or it's in our hospitals or our schools? We need graphic designers in government service. We need doctors in government service. We need engineers and architects and teachers and court officers and law enforcement officials. We need all of these skills and all of these jobs, in the public sector. And I really want to think about how we can create new and exciting ways to create pipelines into those career pathways through our different public agencies, and that's something that I've been trying to work on and focus on over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that this is the big question, right? Especially on the back end of a crisis like we've been dealing with for the last 18 months. What's the future look like? And I think it's a perfect opportunity to reset how we are approaching public work in the state, in New York City, but work in general. How are young people going to engage in the workplace in the future? I'm happy to really speak about that with anybody who's willing to kind of, carry that torch, because it's vital that we pass a lot of what we learned from sometimes from our victories, but also our mistakes to the next generation, so that we're able to be confident that we're leaving, kind of a better situation, or at least a wiser situation for the next generation. But speaking of the pensions, we're facing, inflation and things of that nature. When can you speak to the pension cost of living adjustment and how it could be addressed relating to the cap of the last bill? I believe it was 2% of $18,000, which makes the max $360 per year. Can you just talk about what the COLA is and how it kind of is affected through maybe what you folks do in Albany, and what maybe we can help along the situation with going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So the COLA, the cost of living adjustment, we pass, really because we know it's a defined benefit that our public workers receive when they retire through their pension.
Right.
That's a fixed value. That's a fixed amount. But as we know, over time, the price of everything gets more expensive. So it only makes sense that we create parity with your purchasing power, and that as life gets more expensive year after year, the value of your dollar catches up with the change in pricing. Unfortunately, though, I think over time we've seen that the value of that dollar has not matched the reality in terms of where the price of things are going. And this is not a new phenomenon. This is going on for a long time. We have this 2% COLA adjustment, which helps a little bit. but really it should be a lot better, and it should really match in real dollars what people's costs are facing today. I have several bills that I'm working on in the legislature to tweak the formula in different ways to provide a greater adjustment and to cover that spread and cover that gap, because really no public sector worker should be retiring into poverty. That's not why you pursue public service, and that's not how we should be rewarding or saying thank you by pushing you into a pathway towards poverty. That's not what this is about. And what I think makes this situation more difficult, or really compounds the difficulty here, is that when we try to make these changes to the legislative process, too often, at least since I've been here, and I think it's fair to say, for the last decade, if not more, especially under our previous governor, too often we were playing defense.
Yes.
In terms of trying to protect the benefits that our public workers were receiving, or play defense against changes being imposed on them in terms of new tiers, new benefits, reduced benefits, and things like that. For example, every year the governor would always propose in his executive budget cutting retiree health care.
Yes.
And he would propose shifting the cost and the burden onto retirees. So instead of us as the legislature, or me as the chairman of the Civil Service Committee, trying to lead the charge to increase the COLA or to help expand benefits, we've had to spend all of our political capital and energy trying to fight back whatever else he was trying to do. And I think it was a tactic by the governor to try to prevent us from trying to get to do more than we wanted. And he was kind of successful at it. But really, that's not the way we should be governing. That's not the way we should be treating our public workers. And so hopefully with a new governor now and a new budget season upon us, they're preparing for the budget now for January. Maybe, hopefully, we'll have an opportunity to stop playing so much defense and actually do the right thing for our public workers and help give them the cost of living adjustments that they need in order to retire with dignity.
It makes so much sense what you say, Senator, and I do believe it's a dawn of a new era, and I look forward to it. And in that, looking forward to it, I pledge, myself and our organization's resources to help, support incentives and initiatives such as, an adjustment to COLA and things of that nature. And I'm happy to work with yourself and your staff to write memos of support and whatever we can do to make people and really, constituents more aware of the situation. But it is a new, I believe it will be a new era in both the state and the city, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of get back to common sense.
I really hope so.
Yeah, I think most people do. Again, back to kind of the civil service part of your chair. The Taylor Law is under the spotlight in view of vaccine mandates as of late and employment issues as of late. Can you just speak a little bit to the importance of that law as it pertains to public employees and employers, especially during some of these highly charged times?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there are, even though I'm a lawyer, I don't pretend to be an expert. And even though I chair the Civil Service Committee,
sure.
I will be very upfront. I am not an expert in all of the complexities and technicalities that employment law in New York has evolved to be. It's a very complicated body of law. You got to spend, years kind of studying and perfecting the craft.
Sure.
But just generally speaking, just having a general conversation.
Sure.
Obviously with the Taylor Law, one of the biggest features of the Taylor Law is the presumption of negotiability in terms of workplace rules and regulations, and that anything that's not expressly barred by law or by court order, really should be subject to collective bargaining. That's one of the fundamental principles underlining the entire law.
Right.
This is being, that concept is really being tested right now with vaccinations and with mandates, and whether or not vaccine mandates are or are not subject to that presumption of negotiability.
Right.
And we've seen a couple of cases go forward, with some of our New York City public sector unions challenging the mayor's vaccination mandates. Those cases, have not been successful to date, and that courts have generally sided with the city as the employer or with the agencies, saying that the presumption of negotiability does not apply to these vaccine mandates.
Right.
And, I think that there is a long line of precedents. Oftentimes when we have these court cases and new laws being created, it's because you have two different lines of precedents kind of colliding into each other.
Right.
And then it's a struggle to see which one will come out on top. And so we have this, deep line of history, supporting the negotiability of or presumption of negotiability in the Taylor law on the one hand. On the other hand, we have a line of cases going back 100 years
Right.
upholding the validity of vaccine mandates. And so what we're seeing here is the collision of both of these lines of precedents, which in their own rights are both separately, legally valid. Now when they're colliding together, we see this conflict. And so we don't have any final resolution, no final definitive answer on whether or not these mandates are or are not subject to the Taylor law and hence not subject to collective bargaining. The early court cases have said that they are not, but there's still several appeals left to go. And so I think it's important for all of us to get clarity on this question and on this point, because we're going to have to confront this challenge again in the future. It might not be a coronavirus vaccine. It might not be a vaccine, but it'll be a different kind of mandate that's just as important for us to think about. And so I think it's important that we get clarity here. Whether you are, regardless of where you stand on the vaccine question, I would hope and I would urge that anyone who can get vaccinated does get vaccinated. I think it's important from a public health perspective, but that's a related but separate question to the issue of the mandate and whether or not the existing law allows that mandate or not.
Yeah, that's what we've been dealing with for about the last 2 months, is trying to let people understand, our members and our members' families and really anybody else in the court system who's interested, is that we're not I agree. Anybody who can and chooses to get vaccinated should do so. It can only protect you, but at the same time, if there are reasons that you feel the opposite way, these types of things do have to be negotiated with our employer, and that's what we're currently attempting to do. But I appreciate your generally speaking about it, because it's a topic that a lot of people aren't really. It's a hot topic, but a lot of people aren't interested in talking about it. It's causing people to feel certain ways. So I'll move on to the next topic. What are your biggest priorities when the legislative session begins anew in January?
Well, I think when we get back, there's a lot of catch up to do. I think, as I was alluding to earlier, we faced a lot of challenges with our previous governor in terms of how he was supporting, public workers and the pressures and kind of, that he placed them under, whether that comes from, trying to take away health care benefits, whether that came from trying to withhold staffing in agencies and the understaffing of agencies. So you have one person in an agency now all of a sudden doing the job of 3 people because there were hiring freezes in place. Things like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of catching up to do. I've been encouraged that our new governor has said that she has removed the hiring freeze. That was the COVID hiring freeze, which was an official one. But we all know that there was a long time before that an unofficial hiring freeze where lots of agencies, including in the courts, where we were not hiring up to the level that we needed in order to provide the public the service that they expect and that they deserve.
No
right?
question.
We're all in the public service business, right? That I think is going to be a big priority for me going forward, to making sure that we have fully staffed agencies, to making sure that our agencies have the right equipment and technology. Think about what happened when we had last year with the unemployment system.
Right.
And all of a sudden we had, 8 million people trying to claim unemployment benefits. Our computers couldn't handle that because our unemployment system was working off of computers from 15 years ago.
Right.
Because there was no investment made in the basic infrastructure of government in order to make sure that we could handle something like this. So I think it's important that we look into the future. We make sure that we are replenishing the human capital and human capacity of our agencies, as well as the technological and structural and physical infrastructure of our public departments, because otherwise the whole thing will crumble.
Yeah, right.
So,
yep. And what are any
generalized answer, but it's important that we don't lose sight of this moment to try to just kind of refresh ourselves and invest back into the public good.
You couldn't have hit it on the head more, though. There is no specific answer. It is a general answer, because ultimately, any agency, any state entity, authority, etc., it must consist of people before it consists of anything else. Otherwise, it's invalid. So,
exactly.
And so that's why, and that should be in my opinion, that should be the biggest priority for everybody in both chambers when every legislative session begins anew. Let's focus on making sure everybody has enough people to do the jobs before we even fund them. You know what I mean? Like, let's make sure we have the people to get the job done. Then we do the budget, make sure everybody has enough money to do the jobs, and then we'll go from there on all the ancillary stuff that usually takes place after the budget hearing. But again, generally speaking, that makes a lot of sense. I know there are certain ways of doing things, but again, we are looking at a new era, and including, I would hope, a new way of doing the budget going forward, at least, breaking away from some old traditions.
Yeah, exactly right. And, that's exactly right, and we have to be we have to remember that these agencies, these departments are all staffed by people. And if we're not investing in people, and if we're not investing in the workers who make these agencies go, then we have nothing. Then we don't have a functioning court system. Then we don't have a functioning school system. Then we don't have a functioning public health system. These are all really important. So that's why I think this is going to be a big priority. I also carry legislation, as I'm sure you and your members are aware, to help specifically for court officers, a retirement bill. It's I think it's S5630. It's the 30-year retirement bill that we're trying to pass through. We've had not great success in the past, but we're going to make another stab at it.
Sure.
Coming next year. Also on the disability bill as well.
Yeah.
We keep trying, we keep fighting for that. We've been blocked in the past, but like we've been saying all along, with a new governor, it's a new day. The roses are redder. The sky is bluer.
Yeah.
The air is fresher. Maybe this is our chance to really drive this through.
Yeah, I agree, and I obviously appreciate your sponsorship of a number of the bills that court employees have brought to you over your 4 years there in Albany, and your willingness to kind of look at them and understand where we're coming from on them, and put your name and your capital behind it. I recently read in the Brooklyn Eagle about some issues you commented on regarding redistricting. It's a part of the political universe that goes unnoticed, and more people should be aware of it. Would you like to touch on your viewpoint about redistricting?
Yeah, absolutely. Every kind of you a 2-second crash course for your listeners that might not be familiar. We have to draw new district boundaries every 10 years based on the results of the census, because we want to make sure that every district, as close as possible, represents the same number of people, whether that's our federal districts, our state districts, or our local city districts, city councils, town councils, what have you. So we do this every 10 years. Since the beginning of this country's founding, there has been this really egregious practice of gerrymandering, which was named after Eldridge Gerry, who was the governor of Massachusetts in the 1700s,
right.
Where they drew district lines meant to favor one political party over another.
Right.
And that practice has been expanded and has really been abused to do things like disenfranchise minority voters, favor one party over another, and a whole bunch of other really odious tactics. Here in New York, we were not immune from that. And in fact, the district that I currently represent, if you look at it on a map, it is a monkey blindfolded with a marker could not draw,
right.
A more convoluted district
right.
than the one that I have.
Yeah.
Not to say that I don't love representing my district, I absolutely do, but the district was cut in a way to benefit my predecessor.
Right.
It was a hand-picked person to run for the seat 20 years ago, and they drew a line meant specifically for his benefit.
Right.
That should not be – we should not have a system of government where politicians are drawing district lines to elect themselves with the people having no say. It should be the other way around. The people should be choosing their elected officials. The elected officials should not be choosing their constituents. And so we are engaging in this 10-year process right now with new district lines. We have put in place an independent commission to determine what the new line should be. I'm a firm believer in allowing the independent commission to propose the lines. There's no politics involved. There's no heavy-handedness. There's no weighing of the scales.
Right.
This is what the independent commission says, and then people who want to run for office to represent those constituencies can step up, put themselves in the arena, and then be judged by those voters.
Senator,
and not have anything to do. Not the other way around.
You're as fair a person as I've spoken to on this program, and that take really solidifies it. And I want to sincerely thank you for joining me today. I wish you obviously the best of luck and all the support we can lend.
Thank you, Pat.
And I want to thank all of our audience for listening as well. For information regarding our organization, you can find it at nysscoa.org. You can send me your comments and inquiries at cullen@nysscoa.org. This is a show about our members and for our members, and we want to hear from you. Join us again next week in your court.